Welcome back. We're going to continue looking at the CMS compact system from Festool with the router module. But first, here's a jingle. Last time we mounted our router to the router module and fastened that to the table. We connected the power and the first part of the dust extraction system. Today we're going to have a look at the router fence. This is the router fence. It comes with the table, with the module itself, so that's not an extra. And the module also comes with the usual Festool manual. Pictures inside and multilingual, and that walks you through the setup. First feature to look at is the actual fence itself. This is a split fence, and that means that this side and this side can slide independently of each other, and therefore you can set the gap between the two for the size router bit that you wish to use. Adjustment is really easy. There's 4 knobs. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. You loosen those knobs off, and then that allows the fence sides to move and be adjusted accordingly. And once you get them where you want them to be, you can then lock this down in position. 1, 2, oops, 3, and 4. Now I find you don't need to tighten those super tight. Don't clamp down them. If you do, it makes them quite hard to actually undo. So that's a bit of advice. Now you'll also see there's this knob here at the back. We'll come back to that one in a second once we've got the thing mounted. Another feature is you've got this drop down hinge here, and that's the thing that takes the safety guards and the feather boards on the front of the table, on the front of the fence, and we'll look at that shortly. There's this black clip here, and that locks this into place. Now out of the box it doesn't, or certainly when I got, this doesn't lock into place. You can't push this down far enough, and that confused me for a while, and then I noticed that underneath that there is actually a little piece of rubber mounted. I can't see it mentioned anywhere in the instructions. I may have missed it. I think that is actually for packing, to stop this thing bouncing about when it's in packing. And if you take off that little piece of rubber, then you can see this locks down into place with a nice click, and that just holds that in position. To release it, you pull the clip back and that folds out. So I think that's how it's supposed to work, and otherwise the feather board, and you'll see that, wouldn't support the wood. So I just took those out, rightly or wrongly. I'm sure people who've used this will come back and comment on whether they found the same thing or not. These 2 knobs here secure this to the actual table. And as you can see, there's 4 holes. 2 here and 2 here. The 2 at the front have these little calibration lines on them, and the 2 at the back don't. The reason for this is where you would normally mount it, and that allows the fence to actually come up in line with the router bit. So you can set that flush if you had a bearing router bit, for example. However, if you're routing inside a panel and you needed more distance from your fence to the router bit, that's where you would then go back and use these rear screws here. Normally we'll therefore use these front holes to secure the fence. So we can now drop that onto the table, align these knobs into those holes, and then that will just nip down and put things where it needs to be. Now there's also a gauge. I'm not sure it's going to pick up very well on the camera because it's not the world's best gauge, but it starts at 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 millimeters. And it's got 2, 4, 6, 8 2mm increments on that scale. So this should now allow you to position your piece on these scales. If you set that to 0, on that side and 0 on that side, you can see at the front there that it's actually completely and utterly covered the router bit. So I'm not really sure what reference that's taking its measurements from, but it does allow you to make sure this thing sits parallel. If I come back to about there, which is about 25 millimeters, that tends to be the center of cut. So in my mind that would have made more sense if that was where the 0 position was. But it's not, and it's not really a problem, I do not think. So we'll just push that back to there, just to get it out of the way. So 44 on that side and 44 on that side. And I'm just doing that to get it out of the way. This black knob is quite important. If you undo this little nodule here, you can now wind this fence backwards and forwards in relationship to this fence. And if I just put a straight edge on that, that might help you to see that. So you can now hopefully see there's a gap between this fence and this straight edge, even though that one is flush. And if you watch that gap, you can see that's now moving further away, quite substantially, and that's now moving further forward. Now the reason for that is if we had a straight cutter, straight bit inside here, and I offset these fences, I've just changed my router table into a jointer, which means as I pass material over the router, that will start to give me a straight edge, which is great for jointing. Not much depth inside there, because you're obviously going to be limited by the height of your router bit, but if it was an edge joint on a 18mm piece of wood, which tends to be standard size for furniture boards, that would be really, really good. You could quickly knock out a straight edge to give you some big panels. In normal use, you want those two fences to be parallel, of course. So put your straight edge on and use the knob, wind that forward until it's sitting flush with your straight edge, and that's about there, and then lock it into position. This grey knob here just rotates freely, and you want to now set the 0 position up to a small line that's just on the back of the housing, which is about, well, not about, it's exactly there. So now if I have used this for jointing and I've taken that back, I know that returning it to the 0 position makes sure that my fences are now flush. This device here, this hinged piece, this is where your feather guard assembly fits. Again, this comes with the module itself, so you don't need to buy this extra, and it's quite a cumbersome looking thing, but let's look at the features of it. It's really doing two things. The first thing is a safety device, so these guards stop your hands going anywhere near the router bit. The second thing is, I'm not sure if you can see it, but that says a spring design. You see that going up and down? That's a feather board, and that will put weight and pressure down on your workpiece to make sure it stays flat onto your bench. And similarly, on the plastic one, again, these arms here and these two springs inside do the same thing to make sure that the workpiece stays flat against that area there. And that's why I said before that this needs to be able to lock into position with that clip. If not, that pushes up because that clip's not securing it, and therefore that will take the downwards pressure off it, and therefore you're not going to get a consistent cut. So it's important that that locks into position, which is why I think that piece of rubber is a packing piece. Installation is simplicity. This just locks into there. As I tighten this knob, you can see those wings at the back start to compress, and that just puts pressure inside there and locks everything into place. You want to position that so it just neatly drops down in front of the fence. You don't want it clogging, and then you can tighten that down, and that is done. To release it, pull back on the clip, and that will just fold out of the way. You can then bring your clear guard down and just lock that into position loosely. Make sure it clicks into place, and then I can now adjust this guard forward and backwards to allow for the workpiece, and that locks down to give us pressure. So we've now got the fence assembled, the fence calibrated, the fence padded at the front, and the featherboard and the safety guard put into place. On the back here you can see there's a dust extraction port, which is that piece there, and that's where we attach the second larger hose, and that just pushes into place. So that now gives me top dust extraction and bottom dust extraction, and as I say, the T-piece goes off to the CT extractor and we are good to go. That's it. So we can now drop a router bit inside here and we can try our first cut in this configuration. Changing the bit is simplicity itself. We take the handle and we raise it, and you can see here there's a plus, which means we're raising it, and a minus, which means we're lowering it. So I rotate in the direction of the plus, and you can see that the collet has now raised up. I can quickly take this out and I can put the appropriate size collet in. We're using a half-inch chuck, a half-inch router shank anyway, so it's the half-inch collet that we need, and that just simply flips into place. I can now put the router bit in and just, minding my fingers of course, nip that into place. Remember, all the OF series of routers have that ratchet action, so I can lean under the table and I can engage that like so. And similarly, taking the bit out, you just reach underneath again, engage the other side of the ratchet, and now you can loosen that off. So it's that simple, and all that's happening pretty much above the top of the table, which I think is pretty awesome, to be honest with you. We can now wind that bit down, which allows us to adjust it for the height. Next thing is, I want to put the appropriate insert into this ring. So loosen this off, just push the shelf back out of the way, and this is where these black insert rings now come in. So we're choosing the hole that's right for that router bit, which is probably that one, and it just simply slots into that hole. And we'll just check that, make sure we're all clear and there's going to be no problems, and that looks pretty perfect. To take those out, just lower the router bit down and then they just simply pop out as well. And again, that's toolless, and if I wanted to put this one in, it just slots in, and so on and so forth. So that, again, that makes changing and setting up incredibly quick on this table, which I think is pretty cool, to be honest with you. So I can now come in and I can adjust the position of the shelves. So I'll just put a little bit of pressure on that to lock it down. Loosen off these. Wind up the router bit so I can see the size that we need. And I can just bring these in. I don't want them to be super close to that one. They don't need to be. And I can just lock that fence into position. And now I can lock that fence into position as well, and just check that's clear. I don't want to damage my fence, which is cool. This is the wood we will use. We'll just round a couple of profiles on each side of the wood. So I need to be able to work out the size, the height of this, sorry. So I'll just wind this up till I get something that looks pretty, that'll make a difference to our lives a little bit. Probably something about there. Table comes with a handy storage, so we can now drop this handle into there so we know where it is, and it's always ready for use. Loosen off the fence so we can slide backwards and forwards. Come in with some sort of straight edge. We'll use our rule, rest it on the front of the bearing, and just bring this table, just bring the fences up so everything is now aligned. And now I can lock that down and lock that one down. Good. Bring in the feather guard, make sure it locks down, click, get everything out of the way, and now I just want to work out the height for my feather guard. I simply undo this handle, and now I can lower this so it pushes on the wood. And just give that a bit of pressure and then tighten that down into place. So now when my material goes through this, it will be pushed down onto the flat table. Similarly, undo this black knob and now push this plastic thing up, so this area here and this little piece here again are pressing onto the wood. So now I've got a situation where my hands don't go anywhere near the bit, but the wood slides through quite nicely. Make sure everything is locked down, tight enough. Okay. And we're ready to make our first cut with this table. And before we connect to the mains on the wall, we just need to make sure that the router is turned on underneath. So we just press the on button on the router and just lock that into place using the green knob on the side of the power trigger. With that done, I can now connect the entire thing to the mains. When I press the green button, the router will start and the vacuum will start. And the red button turns it off. So we'll drop on our safety gear and we'll just go ahead and make the first pass. Now, as I said, this doesn't come with a push stick, so we need to get some sort of push stick going on. So I'll use an offcut of wood from the Sysport build. Profile on it, it's nice and clean, it's beautifully smooth. Job is good, I guess. Now that's okay for a standard type of routing we will be doing. I want to have a quick look at how we would use another attachment that comes with the module for doing what I would call, I guess, freehand routing. This is where we're guiding a piece of wood across a router bit with a bearing. And that's where this kit comes in. Now this uses all 4 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, to attach on there. And the idea is that this clear plastic cowl can slide up and down, and therefore we bring that down to the thickness of the material, and that gives us some good strong dust extraction, which is nice. It fits into place with a number of different screws. 3 of these are the same size and they're going to fit into this hole, and this hole. And this one clamps into position like so. Now what Festool have created here is something that's a bit different. The idea is that this lever here is going to rest on the bearing. So I can slide this out and I can also slide it down, and now I can lock that into position. When I bring my material in, it slides down this arm, and that allows me to bring it into the cut and go ahead and make the route. And all the time that's going on, my material is supported on this profile. And at the end, in theory, I can turn this and I can come back into the cut and I can start on my next edge. So this really is an innovative idea of how you do that type of activity. And although you probably wouldn't need to do that on a straight board, it is pretty useful when you're doing arches on cabinet doors. Normally you get a small post that would insert into the bench. You would bring in your wood onto the post and leverage that or pivot that into the cut. And sometimes it does snatch when you're doing that. This, in theory, alleviates it. So we'll go ahead and we'll try and use this cutter to make some sort of profile cut on this scrap piece of material. To set this up, you bring it in and you bring it down so it's pushing down just a slight touch above the height of your material. Lock that into position. Dust extraction, once again, uses the port, slots on the outside this time. So I'm now still dust collection at the top, dust collection at the bottom. My hands are still nowhere near that router bit. And that was painless and results pretty good. We have a nice chamfered edge across here, or whatever you would call that. Yeah, bit of practice, but they're really nice joints. What I did find is that obviously you need to keep this flat to the table, and as I started to get to this end, because I don't have that wide area to rest my panel on, that can tend to tip. But we have a solution for that, and that solution is an extension table. We'll look at that and the sliding table in the next video. See you then.